I'm going to get right into it, and this is a little bit of a different talk, I think, than some of the ones you've had so far today. And I'm going to give you a summary of some perspective based on some research that Accenture has done that has led to some work that we're doing with Chemaxon. And I think it's probably an interesting perspective for anybody in the industry of some of the changes and the challenges and opportunities that we think exist going forward. If there's 5 things that you remember by the end of this, this is it. Cloud, pre-competitive, externalization, componentization, and something that I'm going to call the new for now that I'll come back to, and we'll talk about what that means. I don't know if everybody here knows about Accenture. We're a large global consulting company. We operate at the heart of our clients' businesses, and we work with them on strategic challenges they have, help them reinvent themselves, and offer strategy to them. And we do that very consistently. From a numbers perspective, just over 435,000 employees globally. Of those, 16,000 of our staff are dedicated to our life sciences practice. And last year, we did revenues of just under $35 billion. In terms of what we do in the research informatics space, that's what this slide really summarizes. We do everything. It's obviously a large practice in the life sciences space, but goes beyond that into adjacent industries where a lot of the same tools are used. Chemicals, oil and gas, flavor, fragrance, consumer products. We'll work with IT-type projects, software implementations, work with a lot of the same partners that Chemaxon works with. And there's a key point with this. We're not a product company. So although we do all these things, we'll do implementations, we'll do strategy. We don't write software. So we're not going to invent a new registration system. We're not going to invent a new chemical structure drawing package. We rely on working with our partners and doing analysis of the best of breed for those things, which is one of the reasons why I'm here at the Chemaxon meeting. So some of the research I'm going to talk about is summarized here. The pharma industry is struggling. We all know how long it takes. We know how expensive it is. We know what the challenges are. It's a problem. It's especially a problem in research. And research informatics, research IT is part of that. And if you talk to the research leaders in the major pharmaceutical companies, they're going to say that their research IT departments are not keeping up. And a lot of reasons for that. Bill Burns, who was the former CEO of Roche, last week at the Pistoia meeting in London, said the amount of data that Roche is capturing is doubling every 270 days. Unfortunately, the budgets for research computing aren't doubling every 270 days. The number of staff there are not doubling either. So the scope of the problem is changing. And that's caused, I think, an opportunity to do something kind of different and unique going forward. Pre-competitive is an interesting thing in the pharmaceutical industry. When I was in the lab, I was a synthetic organic chemist. I couldn't even talk to the guys next door, let alone people in another company. We're embracing pre-competitive collaborations in this industry now. So there's a real opportunity to use advances in technology with the fact that pre-competitive is at least in vogue now, and externalization to do something different. So this research was initially driven by a very large pharmaceutical company, one of the top 3 in the world, that's a large client of Accenture's. They also happen to be a member of something we call the Accenture Life Sciences Cloud for Clinical Development. And that's a pre-competitive coalition that Accenture manages of industry standard technology in the clinical space. It helps a group, I think there's 9 pharmaceutical companies that are part of that coalition. And they use this initiative to simplify their data processing, their reporting, their data management in the clinical space. One of the pharmaceutical companies that was part of that initiative came to us and said, this is great, this is working, it's saving us money, it's effective. We have a problem in research that's probably even bigger. We have more vendors, we have more data types, it's not regulated, and by the way, we're all doing the same stuff. We're all using the same vendors. The differentiator is not in the applications, it's in our data and how we interpret that data. So they said, can Accenture help them do something and bring together a group of pharma companies and a group of vendors? Is there an opportunity to do something here unique in the research space? So we do what consulting companies do. We started talking to people. And we spent about 2 years talking to 43 different pharma, biotech, medical institutions. Of those 43, I probably did about 15 or 16 of them personally, those interviews. And this slide summarizes what we learned and kind of what the consensus was. And I generally break it into two buckets. These two bands on the bottom, the red one and the yellow one, really refer to what we captured as we talked to the research computing or the research IT departments. And the one up here in green was coming from the research leadership. So the VP of R&D, the president of R&D, the president of research. And we can go through these things, but I don't think anybody here is going to see anything that sounds wrong. We still aren't really good at data collection. We're not very good at data integration. I worked with pharma companies, large ones, that have abandoned data because they just couldn't find it. So they'd rather spend $10 million to repeat an experiment because they've given up trying to figure out where the data is. This actually still happens. Setting up external collaborations, very difficult. A lot of the software that's in use wasn't designed for it. There's a new generation of products coming out, but that's not the case today. And we have pharma companies that are saying, hey, we have a collaboration with a CRO someplace or another biotech. They can't share any of the data with them that they need to share. At the same time, the head of research in one pharma company picks up the Wall Street Journal, and he hears about his peer in another company implementing a new artificial intelligence algorithm on chemical libraries. Sounds like a great idea. Goes to his IT department, wants to set that up. He can't. It's going to take a year to get the data ready. So the dynamics are starting to change where research is demanding more. We have more and more data types, new technologies, new algorithms, more externalization, and the R&D IT budgets aren't keeping up, and they're unlikely to. So we've got an opportunity to do something different. When we summarize this slide, and we go back to some of the pharma companies and organizations that weren't part of the original research, about 5 minutes into talking about this, they all say you can just put our logo up here. So there's pretty broad agreement that these are the challenges we're facing from a research computing and informatics perspective. So what's some of the other observations or things we learned from these interviews? I gave a talk at Dreamforce, Salesforce's annual conference last year. I had two questions for the audience, which was made up of R&D IT leaders. The first one was, how many of you in the room, put your hands up, have had increasing budgets year over year for more than 2 years? Of the 60 or 70 people, 2 of them raised their hands, which was about what I expected. Second question, for those of you who are highly newly minted researchers, undergraduate to graduate, say 21 or 22 to 26, 27 years old, how many of them have come to you after their first year in industry from graduate school and said, my God, we have the best tools here. They're so modern and cool. I love how much money you guys are investing. Not a single one. The reality is the tools that pharma is using are starting to get a little bit dated. I spent 14 years at MDL. I'm embarrassed to say that some of those systems I sold 20 years ago or implemented 20 years ago are still in use today. Something's got to give. What people are expecting is something that is easy to use, is modern. Data moves from one application to another pretty easily. Kind of sounds like a smartphone, because the generation of researchers being hired have that expectation. And it's not a technology problem. We have all the pieces. We've not applied them in the pharmaceutical research space. And addressing some of the things that are critical for the way pharma is operating going forward, the externalization, more external collaborations, a better modern user interface or user experience, and being able to collaborate are all critical for any of the platforms that have to be implemented going forward. So there's a couple things we've done with this pharmaceutical company. that we've been working with, and this is leading to me to some of the work we're doing with Chemaxon. The dark blue, I mean, these are the applications, just representative. It's not everything, as this group knows. But these are the applications that people are using to support research now. ELNs, entity registration, compound sample management, various analytics and visualization tools, et cetera. For the most part, they're standalone. Just getting the data environment and capturing the amount of data that's being generated is challenging even to those systems. One of the things we've done first, as part of a number of pilots, to test the hypothesis. Could we pull together an external central cloud environment, something that's multi-tenant, something that's going to require less resources to feed all these things? And we've actually done 4 POCs with one pharmaceutical company. The last one was so successful, and it was really focused on setting up a common cloud infrastructure with one of the large cloud providers. This is not one of the niche small providers, but it's one of the big 3. That then handled the data capture, ingestion, the standardization, the integration and enrichment. And the company terminated this proof of concept. We actually were using real data. They went from having an environment internally, on-premise, where researchers were taking 20 to 22 minutes to search and get any answers at all, to something that was seconds and had a lot less maintenance. It was so successful, a pilot, that they just terminated it, went right to production, and that's what they're using right now. So we've proven the concept that we can create this kind of environment in the cloud. And now we're starting to look at, well, how do we make these things look better? And how do we make them more usable and more integrated? Entity registration is a really important thing that a pharmaceutical company does. It's one of the core data types that we have to collect, manage, maintain, and somehow integrate with other data. There's a pivot happening. We're obviously moving well away from small molecules. It's important, but we have large molecules / biologics, antibodies. And the question is, well, are these separate systems? Do we modify the system we have? Or doesn't the technology exist to do a system that's smart, that doesn't care what's being entered, but it should be able to know whether it's a large molecule, biologic, or something else? And so there's an opportunity to do a refresh, and that's probably the highest priority right now. And we've engaged Chemaxon to work with us to start to define what does the architecture, what do the APIs look like, what do the microservices look like, what are those key components that will support a multi-entity registration system. And yeah, I think this is, in talking to our clients, there was a pretty good consensus that we should work with Chemaxon. I mean, this isn't Chemaxon's sweet spot. It's an approach that they've been doing for years. And it's going to allow us to do a couple of things. For each, we have similar projects going along that'll support the capabilities for each of these application areas. And if we can get all of them broken into the underlying components, whether it's APIs initially and eventually microservices, we start to create an environment where you can assemble components. It's something we refer to as the appification of the research environment. Because by setting those standards, we're creating an ecosystem where vendors know how to plug and play their technology. The vision that the pharmaceutical companies we spoke to kind of talked about was this open ecosystem. Not open source, but open, with published APIs, published ways that any vendor could add a new technology to this cloud platform that then a pharma company could choose to use or choose not to use. And obviously, they have to pay for it as well. So creating those standards are going to help us address some of the stuff that we call the new. Not only the collaboration environment, integrating new algorithms, but generating this scientific user interface of the future should be possible. And as we talk to heads of research, it's something that they get very passionate about. The research domain in many large pharma companies, especially the research computing domain, it feels like it's the last part of the business that's really received significant investments, significant updates. The money's been spent in clinical and commercial and manufacturing, but research hasn't gotten that, and maybe because it's the furthest away from shareholders and it takes a long time. But this is an exciting area where we're getting a lot of interest from the major pharmaceutical companies, where this potentially goes is creating an open, pre-competitive coalition, something Accenture has a lot of experience doing, which is one of the reasons the pharma companies have talked to us about this initiative. Can we set the governance in place? And because that's the key thing. We know how to put the structure in place to set it up, to run it. In terms of the vendors, there's effectively an ecosystem gets established of consumers on one side, the pharmaceutical companies, the biotech companies, the medical institutions, and then on the other side, you have the producers. The organizations that are providing key technology, content, new algorithms that they're developing that can help a pharmaceutical company manage their data, analyze their data, integrate it with something else, or workflow technology. So one of the things Accenture is doing is we're having a conversation with not only the people on the consumer side, but the folks on the producer side to explain this work, this initiative that's been on for a couple of years, and is getting closer to some external public announcements now, to talk about how they can get involved and the standards that we'll develop working with partners like Chemaxon that will then publish, that will, they'll see how this is working and create this environment where they can bring their products and technologies to market in what we think, in a similar way to other platform ecosystems in other industries, will be an easier, faster, more effective way for not only the producers to bring their technologies to market, but also provide a mechanism by which the pharma companies and the biotechs on this side can actually implement those technologies much faster than they are today. So that's the vision. That's kind of a summary of some of the research we've done. Thanks for paying attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
You foresee rather an Apple-like or a Google-like ecosystem?
Which kind?
Apple or Google-like ecosystem, or Android?
I think probably more Apple, is my guess. It's going to be interesting. Even the cloud providers, we did a lot of work with evaluating probably, I think, 6 or 7 cloud providers. And it was really looking at them not as much as a storage, but as a partner, because now so much embedded functionality is moving to the cloud. There's so much more you can do with the capabilities there. There is one that struck at that kind of was more visible in terms of understanding research, and specifically life sciences, and then also chemical and some other industries. And we actually changed from one provider to a different one based on some of this analysis and talking to a lot of pharmaceutical companies. But and all I can say is it's the one that has most of the market share today in this space. Probably pretty easy to guess who it is. It's interesting, they also were not aware of how much market they had. They just didn't understand the space enough. So they've gotten much more interested in it as a part of this initiative because they have the large pharma companies saying, we're not just going to send you money, we need you to understand how this works. It's creating an interesting conversation, which I think could help everybody.